had a really unsettling thought when Tom was talking about the guy who scrawled the poem in blood or whatever. Right before I left, you know, my students hadn't got their final grades, so I hadn't heard from them yet. And one of them, I had to fail a guy who wrote about murder all semester, and I had to fail him. He wrote about murder. He wore famous murderer T-shirts. He had like a Richard Speck T-shirt. But he didn't do the work, you know. And I had to, so I don't know if there's going to be like a horse head hanging on my door when I get back. I don't know what's going to be happening. But I thought about that and I said, what if he leaves a poem in blood on my door? I don't, you know. Would you fail him? You would fail him, right? I left immediately. Yeah. The last time I changed the focus of what I was going to do, not the focus, I'm still doing the same thing, but the last time I changed the poems was like basically about 30 seconds ago. The first thing I talk about, and I asked myself, well, why would this be craft? And it's because these were two poems that were very, very difficult for me until I found exactly the right way to approach them. And I think by making the huge stories a little smaller, we can find some unexpected entry points into our poems. I'm going to tell you the story of each of these poems and exactly how it came to be that, you know, I was able to find a way into them. I may have mentioned a couple of things about my dad last night, but it's worthwhile saying my dad is the reason I write. He was a gritty growler, gold-toothed, you know, just a small guy. Seemed much bigger than he was. Used to drive a Lincoln Mark. Yeah, little guy in a huge car going down the west side of Chicago streets. And what he did, what he brought up with him when he came up from Arkansas, he brought with him something I like to call the tradition of the back porch. So at the end of every day, it would be we eat, Dad sits, I sit at Dad's feet, he tells me everything went on that day. And my mother and father both worked at a candy factory. You guys know malted milk balls? Yes. That's like my family legacy. I mean, it's not, they didn't own it, they just worked there. But I grew up surrounded by candy, and 3 years after my mother retired, her skin still smelled like sugar. So that's therapy. So my dad was, you know, he would create his day, and, you know, he would say, here's what's going on at the candy factory, and he would turn the people into characters, and he'd say, okay, I think Sam is cheating on his wife, but and the next day, it's like, did Sam's wife find out? He said, no, here's what happened today. And, you know, he'd have the newspaper, and he'd see that there was a mugging down the street. And he'd say, what do you think that this woman had in her bag? I don't know. What'd she have in her bag? I don't know. Who was waiting at home for her? You know, was she cooking that night? Is she married? You know, I mean, he would start to just open the world up. So I learned to start looking at the world in terms of the stories it could tell, as opposed to whatever I was learning or not learning in school. And my father was the person I told all my secrets to, so much so that when my dad died, my mother and I looked at each other like, and you would be who? You know, I mean, she was just very functional, you know, check my grades, comb my hair, things like that. But my dad knew everything about me, my mother knew nothing. So my father was killed in a robbery. He and my mother could not get along very well. They couldn't live together, so he had his own apartment, and he had a roommate, so the roommate shared the front part and he shared the back part of the house. The roommate had a nephew who had come up from the South and had just gotten out of jail. And like I said, my father had this huge car. And I guess this guy thought my dad had money. So he killed him, went out to the street with the car keys, panicked, dropped the car keys by the car, got on a bus, and was telling people on the bus that he had just killed someone. And he got arrested. My mother would not let me go to any of the trials, so I don't know exactly, I don't know what happened to him. But I had lost my guiding force. This is the man that when I said I wanted to be a writer, he kind of whispered so my mother couldn't hear, you can do anything you want. But my mother, when I told her, said, only white men do that. Ooh. You know, so she's trying to protect me, and you know, in her realm, that was true. She see things on television, she picked things up, and only white men were doing all these things, so she was trying to keep me from being hurt. And you know, my dad was like, oh no, we got this covered, we're gonna do this. So I felt kind of like the bottom had fallen out. So I kind of turned into myself for a long time. In school, in private, I was this great, you know, I would write all the time. I would get these wire-themed notebooks, and I would write these continuing adventures. I was the only child, and my mother's way of introducing me to the world was to keep me away from it. So I would write these things where I was like, I had 6 brothers, they were all incredibly successful, and I was this white girl named Erica Kaufman. I just thought Erica was the best white girl name ever, and I would just fill these notebooks with, you know, Erica has cheerleading tryouts today, and Erica is the president of the class, and all these colleges want Erica to come, and Erica's boyfriend is the star of the football team, but then she also is in love with, you know, and it just kept going on and on and on, and her brothers were all handsome and successful. Her mother was a lawyer, her father was a doctor. It was just, you know, because I'm looking at television, and this is what I'm aspiring to. This is obviously the life that's waiting for me somewhere. So in private, you know, I would do all this stuff and all this reading, and because I was by myself so much. And but in public, my school, I'm from the west side of Chicago. It's a part of town everybody tells you to stay away from. And that's where all the blacks were funneled when they came up from the south. So it later became one of the world's largest ghettos. And the schools were where we sat for a portion of the day. The teachers would mimeograph, that's copy. The teachers would mimeograph something, and they'd hand it out, and they'd put their feet up on the desk, and they'd read the newspaper. Okay, it's like, you are, this is as far as you're going, kiddo, you know. So much so when I would give them writing and say, could you read this? They'd look at it, and they gave it to somebody else, and they said, well, she's obviously copying from a book or something, because I knew words I wasn't supposed to know, because I read so much. So they sent this essay I wrote to the Board of Education in Chicago, and they brought 2 big beefy white men to my school. They took me out of class. They didn't say anything to me or my parents. Took me out of class, put me in a room with no books, nothing, no input at all, and said, no, write something. And it was to prove that I couldn't have known the words I was using. So what I did is I shut down in school, because you didn't want that kind of attention, and I would do all my writing in secret. You know, I didn't want to show that and you get beat up by kids. If you raised your hand, if you did anything, it's like, oh, you think you're something, right? So you go home, you know, you're on your way home, you get jumped by 2 kids because you spoke up in class. You know, so there was this kind of dual thing going on. It's like, oh, the world, and then, okay, be quiet, shut up, you know. And the only person that I could really talk to about that happening was my dad, and he was gone. So for years and years, even after I, you know, really started writing, I wanted to write a poem about my dad. I found out that I could not write about him. I couldn't say anywhere in the poem even alluding to the fact that he was gone. Because if I did that, that meant that there was no chance of magic happening. There was no chance of me waking up and thinking, oh great, there he is, everything's okay. If I said it, that cemented it. So I wound up writing about funny things my dad used to do. You know, my dad took me to a bar when I wasn't supposed to be in a bar and put me on the stool and started feeding me shots of JB. Why did my dad do that? Because he wanted me to be able to drink in any situation and to drink a man under the table without him knowing I was drinking him under the table. Right? And anybody want to challenge me? I'm game. But he's like, I'm going to teach my daughter how to drink. So drink that. Okay. Drink another one. Who was the man I just introduced you to? What's his name? What is he wearing? What song just played on the jukebox? So he's constantly, you know. But now, no problem. Gotcha. So I started writing about those type of things. You know, and it still wasn't saying my father was gone. It wasn't addressing, it wasn't an elegy of any sort. It wasn't addressing the huge loss that I'd suffered. Then I realized what was happening. One of the other things that my dad used to do taught me how to cook. My mom was, you know, watching Bonanza or scrubbing something with bleach, or, you know, and my dad and I were going to, and that was our time to talk. And he would say, today we're going to cook this. And he was one of those, but you know, we never measured anything. It was, everything had Tabasco in it, I don't know why. But the first thing that he taught me to cook was something called hot water cornbread. And so I decided I'll write about that. That'll be another little moment from our lives. And what I realized my mistake was, is I was trying to write the definitive "my father is dead" poem. The one that was going to go down in history, the one that if you read it once and you knew everything you needed to know about my father, about me, and about our relationship. I wanted that loss to feel as deep and profound to everybody who wrote the poem, who read the poem, as it did to me. That was not going to happen. So instead, I took a moment that meant more to me than his death. I took that moment, the cooking moment, and I worked into that all that you needed to know, and also the loss. Okay. And then when I first started doing it, you know, when I first wrote it, I said, this isn't enough. It's not enough. It's not enough. But it gives everybody who hears it, I hope, and everybody who reads it, an entry point. Oh, now I remember something I used to do with my dad. And the fact of his death is made smaller, because that's not what I want you to remember about him, that he's gone. So it was an entry, and I tell people all the time, the smaller the lens is, I tell my students, the smaller the lens, the larger the story. So don't write about the war, write about the battle. Don't write about the battle, write about a particular day in the battle. Don't write about that day, write about that hour when that shit went down. Don't write about that, write about the soldier. Write about the soldier in that hour. Write about the soldier's thoughts at that, you know, and the smaller it gets, the more universal it gets. Okay, and it gives, the smaller it gets, the more of an entry point it gives more people. Okay, so I'm going to read that poem, and then we're going to talk about the poem I sometimes wish I hadn't written. But, oh, the other thing I have to tell you about this, what made it easy to, it's a process poem. So think about this, maybe your father or brother or something taught you how to ride a bike, and you want to write something about your brother, and it's much more complex than that. But at the core of it is this lesson. First you get on the bike, then you do the pedals, then you push, then they push you, then you, okay. So if you can think about that process as being at the core of the poem, that's another entry point. So the process for this was the recipe for hot water cornbread. The recipe for hot water cornbread is simple. Cornmeal, hot water. Mix till sluggish, then dollop in a sizzling skillet. When you smell the burning begin, flip it. When you smell the burning begin again, dump it onto a plate. You've got to wait for the burning and get it just right. Before the bread cools down, smear it with sweet salted butter or smash it with your fingers. Crumble it up in a bowl of collard greens or buttermilk. Forget that I'm telling you, it's the first thing I ever cooked, that my daddy was laughing and breathing and no bullet in his head when he taught me. Mix it till it looks like quicksand, he'd say, till it moves like a slow song sounds. We'd sit there in the kitchen in the half dark, licking our fingers and laughing at my mother, who was probably scrubbing something with bleach, or watching Bonanza, or thinking how stupid it was to be burning that nasty old bread in that cast iron skillet. She always used whole milk and eggs and baked her cornbread until it was plump and sugary. And she called me hopeless as a homemaker, too damned interested in sitting in the kitchen in the half dark, learning nothing at all from a man who had other women and stayed out late on Saturday nights. When I told her that I'd fixed my first ever pan of hot water cornbread, she sniffed and kept mopping the floor over and over in the same space. So here's how you do it. You take out a bowl, like the one we had with blue flowers and only one crack. You put the cornmeal in it. Then you turn on the hot water and you let it run while you tell the secret about the boy who kissed your cheek after school, or about how you really want to be a reporter instead of a teacher or a nurse like Mama said. And the water keeps running while Daddy says you will be a wonderful writer and you will be famous someday. And when you get famous, if I wrote a letter and sent you some money, would you write about me? And he is laughing and breathing and no bullet in his head. So you let the water run into this mix until it moves like mud moves at the bottom of a river, which is another thing Daddy said. And even though I'd never even seen a river, I knew exactly what he meant. Then you turn the fire way up under the skillet, and you pour in this mix that moves like mud moves at the bottom of a river, like quicksand, like a slow song sounds. That stuff pops something awful when it first hits that blazing skillet. And sometimes Daddy and I would dance to those angry pop sounds. He'd let me rest my feet on top of his while we waltzed around the kitchen, and my mother huffed and puffed on the other side of the door. When you are famous, Daddy asked me, will you write about dancing in the kitchen with your father? I say, everything I write will be about you. Then you will be famous too. And we dip and swirl and spin, and then he stops and sniffs the air. The thing you have to remember about hot water cornbread is to wait for the burning so you know when to flip it, and then again so you know when it's crusty and done. Then eat it the way we did, with our fingers, our feet still tingling from dancing. Remember that sometimes the burning takes such a long time, and in that time, sometimes poems are born. So what you do is you look for that special turn in whatever that huge thing is that you're trying to write about. And the smaller the turn, the huger the story winds up being. So anybody who's looking to write, and we'll be talking to my workshop about this tomorrow, looking to write a difficult poem that just seems overwhelming and you can't get a clutch on it, is because you're trying to clutch too much at once. Just make it a little bit smaller. The other one, I want to talk a little bit about my ideas about race when I was a kid. I grew up, I was born in 1955, and when I grew up, my parents put me in front of the television a lot. You know, they were trying to negotiate living in a new place, and television was a really good babysitter because my mom didn't trust anybody to watch me because I was such a little hellfire. And television news back then, the Vietnam War. The newscasts were not, they weren't edited in any way that made sense. So you would get scenes from the war that were really scenes from the war. And there was a little counter on the bottom of the screen during the news telling you how many people had died that day, and the number would keep clicking as you watched. You know, and I'm like a kid. I don't know what's going on. My parents they didn't sit me down and talk to me about the war. They didn't, you know. So a lot of the things I processed, including things about race, because you would see a lot of the civil rights demonstrations, things like that, I didn't have any way to funnel that or to make it make sense. So I felt safer concentrating on things that were far away from me. Like a lot of African American mothers at the time, my mother sat me down and made me look at the picture of Emmett Till in his casket as a lesson. This is what happens when you speak out of turn. This is what happens when, you know, which just made me scared. Which white people can you talk to? Which can't, you know, who's gonna come get me tonight? What am I gonna say the wrong thing? Somebody will bust in here and get me? You know, it's like, and the processing just didn't go that far. So the farther the racism was away from me, the more comfortable I felt kind of addressing it. So I could think about the Emmett Till thing, but I didn't want to think about the person who wouldn't serve my mother in Marshall Fields, downtown Chicago. That was too close. I didn't want to deal with that. So when I heard the story in 1991 that I was living in New England at the time, and someone had painted a swastika on Plymouth Rock. Let me say that again. Somebody painted a swastika on Plymouth Rock. And the reason that I can smile and say that, because if you have been through New England, if you know anyone from New England, if you are from New England, or if you have ever said the words New England, you know that they lost their damn minds. Somebody messed with the rock. Okay? It was like, everything came to us. What are we gonna do, you know? And they could not find the person. They couldn't trace it down to the person who did it, but they found a group, you know, this one group, and they were pretty sure someone in this group had done it. And the group was called the White Youth League. So they found one of these Aryan nation groups, you know, and they found one representative of the group, and they interviewed him. And he was spewing all this hatred. I hate blacks, I hate Jews, I hate gays, I hate everybody. So you have a choice when you read something like that. You can either say, yes, I agree with you, or you can say, what an idiot, and you just go on with your day. Okay, unless you are a writer. Okay, right? So if you're a writer, you're thinking, wait a minute, he started here and I started here. What the hell happened where he went way over here and I went over here? What's going on? You know, so I'm looking at this thing and I pull out the interview, part of the interview, and it wasn't that extensive because, you know, once you said I hate everybody once, there's not many places you can go with it. So I moving it around on my desk, and I'm going, wow, this is another kind of, and skinheads felt really far away from me. That felt like I'm never going to encounter a skinhead in my whole life. This is just, it was like I had them under a microscope, like this kind of racism, yeah. And I moved it around on my desk. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? A little bit before that, and a lot of you know, I got introduced to poetry by getting up on stage and doing it, which has been a good thing, and albatross at the same time in a lot of ways. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I was going to a venue in Chicago called the Green Mill, which is kind of where the Poetry Slam had its start. And they had a competition every night. You know, it was the first time I'd seen a slam. I didn't go intending to participate. And they'd have a regional kind of slam champion. And there was a woman there by the name of Lisa Boscani. And Lisa Boscani was the author of the first persona poem that I ever heard. And she would do this poem, and at the end of it, there would be this white-hot moment of silence. First of all, I'd never thought of entering a poem that way and writing from a perspective inside the poem. I had just, wow, you know. She disappeared, and the person who appeared was the barber who cut the hair of the people who were about to go into the gas chamber. All right, so that's one of the poems that you have. He snipped and clipped and brushed it back, but it just kept growing. Kudzu, had he known it, would not have been as fearless. He waged a constant war, for often it covered him, stifling and smothering, and just when he thought he had it shaped into a livable cut, the French Jew arrived and demanded answers. So he did what he always did. Oh, I have to tell you something. And she did it when she performed it. She had it in first person. When she put it in her book, where this came from, she changed it to he. So you have to think, I should probably just read it with I, but I'll read it like this. So he did what he always did for the last 45 years. He cut the Jew's hair and he tried to find the words. Yes, he had known. No, he didn't understand it, but God has his plans. Well, the people went in, you know, and they did not come out. And that smell, you couldn't forget that smell. They came to him and others in August of 1940. They said that they were streamlining the operation and that they needed his services. The black and red they wore denoted the fire awaiting refusal. They needed no arms. They drove him to the camp and took him to a long gray room and gave him dull, rusty tools. And in came the women, shorn of all. This last slap was personal. Off, they said. cut it all off, and sorted it into piles according to color. Most of the women knew what was coming and that he was preparation. And he tried to do it nice, to give them one last beauty, but the Gestapo demanded faster madness, and he stripped them of ornamentation as quickly as he could. And if he hurt them, he apologized. And if they cried, he lied and said that he was sure everything would be all right. God has his plans. But that's what you say to a dying woman. And when they left, he looked at what they left him, life reduced to byproduct, and he wondered what God, if any, had a plan like that. Why? Asked the Jew, and he cut. Why? Pleaded the Jew, and he snipped. Why? Bleated the Jew, and he trimmed. Why? And he cut. Why? And he snipped. Why? And he trimmed. Because it just kept growing. So regardless of what you think about that poem as a technical being, regardless of what you think about the language and the syntax, imagine hearing that for the first time and people not knowing, what do I do after that? You don't applaud, you don't, and I'd never seen a room held in suspension in that way. And later, when I encountered this story, the frightening choice that was before me was to write in the voice of the skinhead. And try to figure out, the two of us who started here, he went this way, I went this way, and to try and write a poem that would pull us as close back to center as we could get. So I could look at him as a human being and not a thing that I was supposed to automatically hate. Okay? The reason I wanted to mention the performance aspect is not only was the tension, I think, the tension just didn't come from the fact that it was a persona. The tension came from the fact that in performance, what you saw was a skinhead's voice coming out of a black woman's mouth. And that was the thing that kind of put the cap on it. I'll tell you that persona is a magical thing. When I first started doing the poem, it would sound just like me doing a poem. And then I would start to close my eyes doing part of it, and I'd open my eyes and I'd be on the other side of the stage, and I don't know how I got there. Then there was a little twang, a little weird thing to his voice that entered. It's almost as if he was saying, oh, you want to mess with me? Let me tell you how I really sound. And it started coming in, and I said, am I being possessed? This is a very weird thing. But I think if you give a persona room, the persona will take a part of you over. It sounds kind of weird and mystical and strange, but I believe that. And the last little thing I need to tell you, there's also another, one of my favorite persona poems. For those of you who don't read she was kind of like the master of the persona. I think all of her books were probably primarily driven by persona poems, and J. Edgar Hoover's voice, and this is one that I particularly like because it's that kind of horror, dread, and suppressed violence around a man looking at a pregnant woman and figuring that once that baby's born, my life is going to change forever, and I can't do anything about it. It just keeps growing. Same thing, So this is my funny story, and then I'll do the poem, and we'll take some questions. I was in East Germany with Paul Beatty, Louis Rodriguez, Alan Kaufman. Some people were doing a little tour, and I'm in this club, this little bar. And earlier, Paul Beatty, who's an African-American author, and I were standing on the sidewalk, and some people had gone by with the car windows open with bats, waving, yelling things at us we couldn't understand, but we thought we should go inside. So we went inside, and part of me, and this is how writers get in trouble, I was saying, man, I wonder if I should just do a skinhead poem here. This might be interesting. And look, there's a guy in the back who looks like he might actually be a skinhead, and I could get his response. I could talk to him later, maybe buy him a drink, and we could kind of figure out. So I do this poem, and this weird chain of events. I'm doing this poem, and there are two guys in the back who start moving forward while I'm doing the poem. Including the guy who I thought really was like a skinhead. And they're coming up, and they're not like smiling like, oh, what a wonderful effort. And as I'm doing this, there's a photo, there's a picture by the stage. The picture falls, hits me on the head. I fall out, right? So the people I'm with thought I'd been shot. So there's all this chaos. Give her air! Oh my God, is she bleeding? And it was just this picture that fell from the thing, and then the skinheads were laughing. It was hilarious. That's as funny as that story gets. I'm sorry. But I did wind up doing it, and I actually did. Everybody there speaks English, you know. So I actually did wind up talking to, and they weren't happy. But they wanted to talk about it. Like, what would make you do that? And I told them all about the story and what had happened. They said, oh, those weren't real skinheads. And So anyway, the craft part of what I've been talking about is basically what I tell my students in any situation they're writing is to try on all of the shoes in the story. And when the shoes become really uncomfortable and you want to take them off and flee, that's when you should start writing. That's the viewpoint. That's the viewpoint that rattles you is the one that your reader's going to remember. Okay, and it sounds an awful lot like, you know, I mean, when writing about Hurricane Katrina, I knew that Katrina had to be personified, that she had to speak in that book, you know. So I wrote a lot of persona poems that didn't need to be persona poems. They were just, I was so excited about it. It's like, oh, look, it's a piece of gum stuck under a desk. I wonder how long it's been there. I wonder what it's seen. You know, and it's something like everything else. You learn it, you put it in your toolbox, and then when the right poem comes along that's asking for it, you have the ability to do it. One of the things that Tom said about learning meter, learning structure, it's invaluable. If you never even write another poem in meter, just to have that and to be able to open a book and see what a poet has done technically to help heighten your response to a poem is a really liberating way to go through your art. So, anyway, I have to stand up and do this because I can't have a fold in my body. I don't understand that. Because skinheads don't sit down ever. I'm also about to do something that might make you mad, but okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. And then I'm going to run out of here because you guys went, Okay. They call me Skinhead, and I got my own beauty. It is knife scrawled across my back in sore, jagged letters. It is in the way my eyes snap away from the obvious. I sit in my dim matchbox, on the edge of a bed tousled with my ragged smell, slide razors across my hair, count how many ways I can bring blood closer to the surface of my skin. These are the duties of the righteous, the ways of the anointed. The face that moves in my mirror is huge and pockmarked, apple-cheeked, scraped pink and brilliant. I am filled with my own spit. 2 years ago, a machine that slices leather sucked in my hand and held it, whacking off 3 fingers at the root. I didn't feel nothing until I looked down and saw them on the floor next to my boot heel, and I ain't worked since then. I sit here and watch niggers take over my TV set, walking like kings up and down the sidewalks in my head, walking like their fat black mamas named them freedom, while my shoulders tell me that ain't right. So I move out into the sun, where my beauty makes them lower their heads, or into the night with a lead pipe up my sleeve, a razor in my boot. I was born to make things right. It's easy now to bend my big body into shadows,
To move from a place where there was nothing into the stark circle of a street light, the pipe raised up high over my head. It's a kick to watch their eyes get big, wide and gleaming like cartoon jungle boys, just in that second before they know the pipe's gonna come down. And I got this thing I like to say. Hey, listen, I like to say, hey nigger, Abe Lincoln's been dead a long time. I get hard listening to their skin burst. I was born to make things right. Then this reporter comes around. Seems I was a little sloppy kicking some fag's ass, and he opens up and screams about it. So this reporter finds me at home in bed, the TV flashes licking my face clean. Same old shit. I ain't got no job. The Cullerton's fix got him. Why ain't I working? Look at my hand, asshole. No, I'm not part of no organized group. I'm just a white boy who loves this race, fighting for a pure country. Sometimes it's just me. Sometimes 3, sometimes 30. AIDS will take care of the faggots. Then it's gonna be white on black in the streets. Then there'll be 3 million. I tell him that. So he writes it up. And I come off looking like I'm some kind of goddamn freak, like I'm Hitler himself. I ain't that lucky, but I got my own beauty. It's in my steel-toed boots, in the hard corners of my shaved head. I look in the mirror, and I hold up my mangled hand, only the baby finger left. I know it's the wrong finger, but fuck you all anyway. I am riding the top rung of the perfect race, my face scraped pink and brilliant. I'm your baby, America, your boy. Drunk on my own spit, I am goddamn fucking beautiful. And I was born and raised